Welcome to Kids Talk Church History, a one-of-a-kind podcast where kids investigate the history of the church. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So, has he kept his promise? How has Jesus built and preserved his church against all odds? Come with us on a trip through history to find the answer, here on Kids Talk Church History.
The 19th century saw the birth of many new religious movements. Some may seem very strange to us. At least 4 of these movements are still around today. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which you may know as Mormons, Christian Scientists, Seventh-day Adventists, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Join us as we learn more about these and other movements here on Kids Talk Church History. I am Grace. I am 14 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
I'm Priscilla. I'm 12 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas.
And I am Isaac. I'm 11 years old and also live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Mormons are easy to recognize. They often go 2 by 2 and are dressed in black pants, a white shirt, and a tie.
Yes, those are Mormon missionaries. I don't think they all dress like that all the time. And I've read somewhere that now they have women missionaries too, and they dress any way they want. But they all have tags on their shirts so that you know who they are.
So, what do they teach?
They believe that the Book of Mormon and the Bible are both the Word of God. So since the Book of Mormon teaches some things that are not in the Bible, their beliefs are different from ours.
Who is Mormon?
It's supposed to be an ancient prophet and military general from the 4th century who wrote the story of his people onto golden plates. In the 19th century, a man named Joseph Smith said he received those golden plates as a special revelation from God.
Did he keep those golden plates? Did anyone else see them?
I actually don't know. That's why we have an expert here who can tell us about Joseph Smith. But before we turn to him, I just want to mention a couple of other religious groups that started in the 19th century America. One was Christian Science, started by Mary Baker Eddy. She taught that Jesus came to save the world not from sin, but from incorrect thoughts. In fact, everything physical, including our illnesses, is an illusion created by these thoughts. So if you free yourself from your illusions through faith and prayer, you can live without sickness, sin, pain, and even death.
Without death? But you die, right?
Yes, I think all Christian Scientists do. We'll see if our guest can explain this better.
I can testify that cancer is not an illusion. I recently finished 2.5 years of treatment for leukemia. But I read that some actors and other famous people are Christian Scientists.
Another group that started around the same time were Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't believe in the Trinity. They believe that Jesus is not God, but was created directly by God. And they have their own translation of the Bible. Then there are Seventh-day Adventists, who believe that Saturday, not Sunday, is the day to keep holy. Each of these groups believes different things that are not in the Bible. There are so many things to say about these groups, but in this episode we'll focus on Mormons with our guest, Dr. John Turner, professor of religious studies and history at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and author of the book, Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
I am really pleased to be here with you, Grace, Isaac, and Priscilla. Thanks for having me.
So we talked a little bit about Joseph Smith, the group he started, and other religious groups that started in the 19th century. I know there's a lot more to say, but did we get anything wrong in what we said?
No, you were great. And I love the fact that you all are so curious about history, particularly the history of religious movements. And, you almost got through the whole name, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, without stumbling. I mean, it's a bit of a mouthful.
Yes. So I read that you're a Presbyterian. What inspired you to write a book about Joseph Smith?
So I'm a Presbyterian, but I'm also a curious historian. And so I guess a couple of things make Joseph Smith a really captivating subject for me. First of all, he essentially ushered a new religious tradition into the world. So a tradition that has some original and different beliefs about God, new scriptures, new rituals, and unlike something from, say, the 7th or the 9th century, this is all pretty well documented. Like, we have a lot of sources that tell us about this from letters and diaries and newspapers. So it's kind of a gold mine for a historian interested in religion. Also, in addition to religion, Joseph Smith and his movement, they were, politically and culturally significant in the 1800s. Like, this was a movement that a lot of people have found controversial, and there was a lot of tension and conflict between Mormons and other Americans, really from when Joseph Smith burst onto the scene through the end of the 19th century. And then finally, Joseph Smith was just a larger than life figure. So just in terms of personality and activities, there's a lot to take an interest in.
Could you sum up his life for us?
Sure. How long is this program? So I'm just kidding. So the funny thing about Joseph Smith is he only lived 38 years, but especially the last 15 or 16 years of his life were just full of sort of unexpected activity. To start at the beginning, he came from a downwardly mobile family in Vermont. Like, his parents were incredibly poor. They had all sorts of economic false starts. They lost their land. When people saw Joseph Smith at the age of any of you, they could immediately see that he was from a really poor, destitute background. Like, his clothes were pretty raggedy. He didn't have much formal education. Then he burst onto the scene really in the year 1830 when he published the Book of Mormon and founded a church. From that background, that's already pretty astonishing. And then over the last 14 years of his life, he founded a series of communities. His church built a temple and started work on another, introduced all sorts of new practices. He had some stints in jail. He ran for president. He married more than 30 women. So there's this is quite a hard story to summarize in a few minutes.
Is it true that the followers of Joseph Smith prefer to be called Latter-day Saints?
So that's mostly true. So if you're a student of the New Testament, or if you take a look at particularly the letters in the New Testament, you'll notice that saint is usually sort of a synonym for a believer, a synonym for a Christian. Catholics regard saints as particularly holy individuals, like a really unusual, like, set of elite Christians. But in a New Testament sense, in a Protestant sense, a saint isn't a martyr or someone super special. It's just a believing Christian. So Joseph Smith's followers started calling themselves saints. And then they also began calling themselves Latter-day Saints in the sense of the earliest Christians were saints from way back when. And Joseph Smith and his followers thought of them as God's saints in the last days. The name of the church was at first simply the Church of Christ. But there were a lot of people who started churches called the Church of Christ back in the early 1800s. And so Joseph Smith and his followers added the term of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
What do they teach today, and are they faithful to the teachings of Joseph Smith?
So that's a huge question. So, I mean, here's the thing. Joseph Smith, he taught a lot of things over the 14 years of what you could call his ministry or church leadership. I'll just mention a few of them, like pretty quickly. Feel free to ask, for more detail. So he taught that there, instead of simply heaven and hell, he taught that there are three kingdoms of heavenly glory, that people who belong to Christ's true church could go to the highest kingdom, and other Christians might go to a middle kingdom. Other just like not so great people would go to a lower kingdom. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still teaches that. He also taught toward the end of his life that Jesus Christ and God the Father are two separate divine beings. So, like literally, Father and Son. The church still teaches that. So, those are a couple of examples. One of Joseph Smith's teachings that righteous men had the obligation to marry additional wives. The church abandoned that under pressure from the U.S. government, so they no longer teach that.
I read that with the golden plates, Joseph Smith also received some special glasses that allowed him to translate the writing on the plates. What happened to the golden plates and the glasses?
Oh, that's a fun question. So essentially, the way Joseph Smith told the story is that those glasses, or he sometimes called them spectacles, he also called them other things, seer stones. Those were given to him to help him interpret the writing on these golden plates, or to translate the writing on the golden plates into English. And as he told the story, when he was done with that translation, he gave them back to the angel who had given them to him in the first place. So that means that there isn't a museum in Salt Lake City or anywhere else where you can examine the plates or the spectacles.
Was Mormon a real person? Do we have any accounts of him in any documents apart from the golden plates?
Nope, we don't, Isaac. That's a great question. So, I mean, this, you could probably get different answers if you asked faithful believing members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But my understanding is that the Book of Mormon is Joseph Smith's own creation, and there isn't archaeological or other historical evidence for the events that it narrates. And let me just give you a parallel, if I could. So people spend a lot of time arguing about the historicity of the Bible. Do we have proof for everything that happened in the Bible, from other sources? And, we don't have proof from other sources of everything happened in the Bible, but we have archaeological evidence that, say, the city of Jericho existed. Especially as time goes along, there are evidences from outside the Bible that ground its historicity. We don't have things like that for the Book of Mormon. And so we don't have evidence that individuals like Mormon or Moroni existed.
Did many people follow Joseph Smith?
What's your definition of many, Isaac?
A lot of people.
Okay. No, I like it. So, I kind of think if you start sort of a controversial new religious movement, like most people are not going to have anything to do with it. But, and that was true in this case, like most people rejected the Book of Mormon. They weren't interested in Joseph Smith's church. But over time, more and more people did join. By the time that Joseph Smith died in 1844, I'd have to look up the exact statistic, but there were probably something like 40,000 church members, which, by 1844 standards, that's quite a lot. And pretty quickly, the church spread beyond the United States. So by the early 1840s, there are actually quite a few converts to Mormonism in places like England. And you mentioned in your conversation at the outset that one of the things that you think of when you think of Mormons is missionaries, people going by, two by two, to spread the teachings of this church. And that was true from a pretty early point, like almost right off the bat. And those missionaries did find people who were interested in this message.
Why do you think so many new religious movements started in America during the 19th century, and do they have anything in common?
Wow, that is a fun question. So you mentioned a few groups at the outset that really span the whole 19th century, from the Mormons to Christian Science to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Seventh-day Adventists, which is actually worldwide the biggest of the four that you mentioned. There are actually quite a few others as well. Churches of Christ, Disciples of Christ, lots of different branches of Methodism, and lots of different kinds of Baptists. So why does this take place? I think the most basic explanation is that the American Revolution ushered in an unprecedented amount of religious freedom, that people could, first of all, they could start new religious movements. Sometimes, like the Mormons, those groups were persecuted, but for the most part, Americans had a lot of freedom to pursue new religious ideas and practices. Did they have anything in common? I mean, there's so many different groups that maybe just sheer diversity is more of the story than any kind of like unifying thread. I maybe if anything, most of these groups rejected Calvinist theology. They wanted to move in new theological directions. A lot of them were interested in the second coming of Jesus Christ and thought that it might be just around the bend. Also, a lot of these groups believed in sort of the possibility of human perfection and power, or the power of the human mind. So I wouldn't say we could point to anything that connected all of them, but you could probably find a few themes that fit multiple groups.
How many of the religious groups that started in this time period still exist today?
Oh, that's a fun question. I don't know if you could like totally break it down, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is still growing, especially in certain parts of the world. It claims 18 million members around the world today, more than half of them outside the United States. I wouldn't really say it's growing in the United States, maybe holding steady. Christian Science, it probably peaked in terms of numbers in the early 1900s. It's dwindled a bit since then. Jehovah's Witnesses, they're still around. A lot of other movements and little churches still exist, but maybe didn't achieve like super amazing prominence.
Can you explain how Christian Science teaches that illness and death is an illusion? And can anyone break that illusion?
Oh man, a Christian Science question. That one's hard for me. I'll take a stab at it, but I'm not an expert on Christian Science. So, one of the starting points of Mary Baker Eddy, who founded Christian Science, is that God is love and wouldn't create or allow sickness. And so, therefore, sickness is seen as really an incorrect perception of the mind rather than like an objective physical condition. There are a lot of things that flow into this belief. I would put it down simply in the end to the power of the human mind, and that ideas and thinking ultimately are more powerful than the material world. I think, that's been a struggle for Christian scientists to live out, because people who are practitioners of Christian Science, they still do get sick and die. And more recently, Christian Science has made a bit more space for its members to seek out medical help, especially in like really scary, serious situations.
Why did most of the Mormons move to Salt Lake City?
Well, that's a huge question as well. It's not just because Utah is beautiful. Essentially, they gathered. One of the things that was really characteristic of Joseph Smith's church was that if you join the church, you should gather with the other saints. And so they gathered together and built communities in Ohio, in Missouri, in Illinois. And wherever they gathered in large numbers, it was super controversial. And non-Mormons worried that they would be outnumbered, and there was conflict and violence between Mormons and non-Mormons. Eventually, after Joseph Smith's murder, he was killed by a mob in 1844. Mobs forced the church to leave Illinois, and they wanted to go somewhere where other Americans would basically leave them alone. And at the time, there really wasn't any white settlement in what became known as Utah. Technically, it was Mexican territory as of 1846. It then became American territory through the U.S.-Mexican War. So they went to Utah essentially to get away from everybody else. And eventually everybody else sort of caught up, and the church changed some of its practices in order to sort of become a peaceful part of the country again.
You must have spoken to many Mormons during your research. How should we talk to them if we meet them? How can we best share our beliefs?
That's a great question. So, there's nothing super unusual about meeting Mormons. You're a lot more likely to do it if you live in certain parts of the country than others, but you can meet church members in Raleigh, in Austin, in Northern Virginia, where I am. You don't just have to be in Utah. Most Latter-day Saints live, very moral, family-centered lives. They know their Bible and church doctrine, and they tend to love talking about it. I always think the best thing to do when meeting people from different traditions is to do what you're doing on this program, to ask questions. It's a really good way to get to know people. And if you're a Christian, you don't need to be afraid to talk to people from other backgrounds. It doesn't need to threaten your own faith or beliefs. It helps you get to know the world better. Um, in the case of the Latter-day Saints, Mormons and other Christians have actually a lot in common. Mormons really do love Jesus Christ and believe in his atoning sacrifice. That doesn't mean there aren't some big theological divides between Mormons and, say, Protestant Christians. I always go back to an argument that C.S. Lewis makes in his book, Mere Christianity. He says that if you're a Christian, you don't have to believe that other people are wrong about everything. You just have to be able to defend your beliefs precisely where they disagree with other beliefs. So in the case of Mormonism, you might want to be prepared to explain the Trinity, which I know that's a big concept, but you might want to be prepared to explain why Jesus is God, and perhaps why no ritual is a strict requirement for humans to receive forgiveness from their sins and salvation.
Do you have a favorite story about Joseph Smith?
Oh, that's a fun question. History ultimately, it's storytelling, I think. So yeah, can I tell two really quickly? Is that
Yes.
okay, Isaac?
Yes.
Okay. One thing that I like about Joseph Smith is that he loved his dog named Old Major. The kind of funny thing is, even when the dog was pretty young, he still called it Old Major. And I don't know if any of you have pets, but Joseph Smith's dog, like most dogs, he could be a nuisance at times. The dog really liked to bark at night, which totally annoyed other church members. But later in his life, when Joseph was away from his family or when he was in jail, he would often write letters to his wife and ask her if old Major was still alive. So I find that really touching. It's really human. The other thing that I find fun about Joseph Smith is he loved to wrestle. That's something most people don't know about him, but he was kind of a big, strong guy. He usually won when he challenged someone to wrestling. And one of my favorite moments is he got out of jail after spending a couple of months in this really squalid jail in 1839, and they took him to another town. And he wrestled the strongest man in that town and won. So that's pretty good to be able to do right after you get out of jail. So he loved his dog and he loved to wrestle.
Wow. Well, Dr. Turner, we are so thankful that you decided to spend this time with us. And listeners, keep telling us what you think of these episodes and keep asking questions. We will pass them on to our guest experts as soon as possible. And make sure you check out our website, kidstalkchurchhistory.org. In partnership with the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals and on behalf of my co-hosts, Priscilla and Isaac, I am Grace. Thank you for listening to Kids Talk Church History.